Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining this session entitled Human, Inclusive, Flexible, Insights on Remote Collaboration. I am Harold Jackson, Head of Global Analyst Relations at Slack, and I believe it is safe to say that we have all went through quite a bit of change this year. Not only has this change significantly disrupted our workplace norms, it has caused us to reassess how we collaborate with our colleagues and our customers while working remotely. Today, we will hear from an industry analyst, a Slack expert, and an enterprise leader who have all been influential in navigating these dramatic shifts for their respective organizations. First up, we have Wayne Kurtzman, Research Director of Social and Collaboration at IDC. Wayne will break down his research-based findings and reveal a few predictions of the future of remote work. Next, we will have Stephen Franchetti, Slack's VP of Business Technology. Stephen will share the strategy behind Slack's transition to a distributed workforce and explain how the platform was used to assist customers that were forced to do the same. And to close, we are very fortunate to have Miguel Edwards, CIO of Pan American Life Insurance Group. Miguel will discuss how his company successfully shifted to a remote work environment in an industry that is very resistant to change. Now, let's anchor this session in factual insights from IDC. Wayne, over to you.
Thank you, Harold. About 11 years ago, I was auditing a class by the author and journalism professor, Jeff Jarvis. And he said, interestingly, that the internet is a place. And I think he started on the right path and let everyone else auditing the class, and especially the class, fill it in. And the internet is, in fact, a place. It's a place where people learn, they act, they react, they collaborate, they invent with each other, they transact, and they affect transactions, and they do it all in real time. 2020 is the year that we started understanding, as a group, the internet is a place. I'll reach out to you on Slack. We'll figure it out. Let's meet on this platform. The platforms are the place. 2020, however, is also the year we realized work may not be a place, and that kind of changes everything. So on the whole, you have to go somewhere, and the news is just all over the place. So where do you go? Where do you focus? Where do you put your energy? That's what we're going to cover today. IDC created an enterprise recovery model. It is a 5-step program to know where you are, where you should be putting your energies, what's coming up next. No, it's not U-shaped. We're not looking at a U-shaped recovery. That's just to help you along. And the X-axis, no, that doesn't have any time on it either. We're not predicting time. But at the bottom left, you'll see the economic situation, and at the top, the appropriate business focus in there. So for example, the COVID crisis started. The thing that we're looking at is business continuity, keeping business going, the understanding that hypervolatility is the new norm. It's what we have to handle. The hypervolatility is probably going to lead into things that are a lot more dynamic, and a lot of people aren't thinking about digital transformation yet. IDC research shows that currently 28% of enterprises in North America feel they're still at the beginning of the COVID crisis, and there's a lot more left to go. The next level is the economic slowdown. That's where cost optimization starts coming in, where there's a lot of focus on specific technologies to help mitigate the financial downturn, to help being more effective at getting through this. And currently, 31% of companies say we're in the cost optimization phase. Stage 3 is the recession and business resiliency stage. This means focus is actually the resiliency. It's the ability to adapt to changing circumstances. It's the realization there will be no awards handed out for analog transformation. We need technology to help us digitally transform. At the time we're recording, 9% of enterprises in North America say that they are there. But on the other side is the return to growth. They see what was changed and what they had to change in the enterprise and maybe some of the products, people working from different places, utilizing people in different ways, and all of a sudden starting to see which way is out. Currently, 18% of companies identify as being in the targeted investment stage. And finally, the digital economy, as it's emerging out of COVID-19, is the next normal. People will be working from different places. Digital transformation and the technologies necessary to make it happen come in right here. And currently, 15% of North American enterprises say they're there. And when we look globally, we'll see that about 41% of global enterprises say they're to the right of that recession mark. And if you look at Asia Pacific companies, 67% say they've digitally transformed and they are on the way out. But what are the challenges that everyone's facing? Pretty much the ones we always had. Communications. Communications has been the big area for a lot of companies. So, for example, if we take a look at this, you'll find that the top issues are still around processes and about collaborating with those internal and external to the company. Things haven't changed, but one thing has. Over the last 10 years or so, a lot of people were using smartphones, and when they need to know something, they look it up. You need to collaborate, you download an app. If you need to communicate, you download an app. Bottom line is they knew which apps to use for when, and they've been using it to streamline work as well as home life. As a matter of fact, even nonprofits and NGOs that they've been helping out have benefited from that. And 56% of all collaboration applications inside an enterprise start as unauthorized. And they are generally coming from the folks who already figured out this will help us work bigger, better, faster, and cheaper. Now, on the other hand, you have 62% of business leaders that are really concerned. Their biggest challenge in digital transformation is that consumer expectations are way ahead of our company's ability to change. Let me go over that again. The business leaders are saying consumer expectations are way ahead of our company's ability to change. So we have two different things that are going on here. You have one group that has transformed their everyday life. You also have another group that are really slow to adopt and everything in between. Honestly, businesses thought they had 8, 10, 12 years for digital transformation. It just happened a lot quicker. We are right at that point with the old way and the new way, and we're all feeling the pressure between both gears kicking in. But this is what happened that changed everything. This was the unexpected good news, is that you had the folks, the connected consumers who went to work were connected workers. And the folks who weren't going to change and adopt technology now are willing to learn. And you have people who are willing to mentor them, people willing to learn, and that means businesses can change fast. And they did. They actually, slingshot is a term. That group that wouldn't adopt quickly actually helped power the market by 5 years. The adoption, not the sale, but people adopting collaborative technologies has accelerated by 5 years in the past 6 months alone. That's phenomenal. Normally, it would have taken to 2025 to get to the number of people that are using collaboration applications now, but it's actually going faster thanks to learners and the mentors. How did they do it? They started the same place. Security, just saw the beginning. IT, we need security, we need governance, we need compliance. Everything builds from there. And now they want to mitigate risk with a collaborative stack and a collaborative culture. The first thing that was done, this is the day that many of us started working from home, is communications layers. They needed to put messaging in place, leverage conferencing and team collaboration applications. Conferencing, they wanted to be face-by-face and do video. They wanted to feel connected to each other. And now they can bring messaging, collaboration, conferencing into a collaborative environment, but they also need some documents. So the content layer comes in, office suites and file sharing. These 5 markets are key because companies that did not provide an easy consumer-grade use, business-featured product, well, those connected consumers brought it in. They need to look good, so they're going to collaborate any way they need. But if companies do it right, you can have the security, governance, and compliance. When IT started identifying who was using these internally, a lot of IT departments saw the benefits. The users had already battle tested it out. They just added their governance and security layers on top of this and said, yeah, this will do. And that helped this market grow even faster and become more important when working remotely. But there were superpowers still out there. Some early adopters already found these superpowers. This is the productivity layer. This is the integration layer where you can take work management, every system of record, even the MarTech stack of communities and social media and other key integrations, and bring it together. This means that you could do more from a single pane of glass than you could ever do before. And collaboration applications enabled groups to form around the projects, around the people doing work, and not the org charts. The org charts were never up to date anyway. But I mentioned there needed to be collaboration, and this was also part of the secret sauce. It needed to be, each group needed to be based on trust and openness. People wouldn't share their best idea unless they felt comfortable. It needed to be safe and an inclusive place where they can engage with convergent and divergent ideas, because face it, some ideas come out half-baked. They need some assembly. Sometimes those are the best ones. But also mentor and modeling. The way the mentoring group brought along the rest of the enterprise before, peer mentoring enabled people to understand what the behaviors were, what the expectations were, and they gave a peer an opportunity to answer the question and ask the question, not as threatening as a manager or an empty email box. This helped build a real community, just the way you would in real life, only online. And finally, cross-silo mentorship. Again, don't worry about the org chart. Get who you need in the group from different departments and around the world, and this streamlines work. And when you bring the collaborative stack together with the collaborative culture, all of a sudden you do see magic starting to happen. So were people adopting this in bigger numbers? In fact, most worldwide businesses are investing in collaborative applications. If we take a look, we'll see the bottom line is worldwide numbers. So 56% of our survey worldwide said, yes, team collaboration is being used. They are going to add, actually what we did was something a little bit more than that. We were asking them to create tech parity. IDC defines technology parity as the requirement that all workers have secure access to the resources they need to do their job on any device and from wherever they're working. And we asked the question, in 2020 and 2021, will you be investing in these areas? Team collaboration, management and security devices, video conferencing, and even traditional office productivity suites are all key areas. More than 50% of worldwide enterprises will do it, but over 90% of those in North America will be adding these. Over 90%, in some cases as high as 96% of enterprises will be adding team collaboration, management and security, video conferencing, and traditional productivity suites. Honestly, the way we work is changing and changing dramatically. It's not going back. This is the new norm. This is part of digital transformation. The internet is a place, and this is how we're going to use it. The benefits that companies are seeing, and this was before the pandemic, are significant. They're wide-ranging, but they come down to several groups. Real-time information, increased personal productivity, increased group productivity, and saving time. The one beneath it is most interesting. It's feeling more informed and more connected. Feeling informed and connected, and remember, this is before the pandemic, is significant. It's even more important now. But the real-time information prevents people from working on projects not knowing the mission has changed, to be able to focus, to handle some of those communication problems we were talking about a little bit earlier. Then they're measuring things that are quite exciting and new. Top measurements, is collaboration working? Are the number of actions completed? Fewer emails, the overall results of the team, and actions taken. Something to note about this, remember that superpower segment I was talking about that focused on use of APIs? A lot of these are based on integrating the data that comes from other systems with the collaboration system. It adds to the superpower, and it's creating a new set of metrics that's meant for the period that we're entering now, that of digital transformation. Actually, when you start breaking it down, 3 is the magic number for integrations. The number of integrations, 3 or greater, start adding a lot of these superpowers of greater productivity. And when you start looking at time savings, they save a mean of 30 hours per week per person, according to IDC research. 30 hours a week, that's like cloning yourself without all the science. It's a lot easier. This is part of what's happening. By the way, integration, when you're using 6 or more integrations, that number goes higher. It is like adding people to the department without adding people. And finally, 64% of those surveyed saw increases greater than 25%, and some above 75%, again, where integration was greater, where mentoring and modeling was used, and where multiple forms of training were used to onboard people. Collaboration is a game changer. It means faster information in more places quicker. Remember the model? What we're talking about really is flattening this curve. Just flattening the curve the same way, but it's through several ways. Collaboration is not just technical. It's the cultural willingness to share from the top down and the bottom up. And it's the opportunity to win as a team using the right technologies and that assumption that everyone can add value. My name is Wayne Kurtzman from IDC. Thank you for your time today. Have a great week.
Thank you, Wayne, for sharing those market insights. It's fascinating to learn how successful teams required an unexpected cultural shift in order to keep distributed employees both connected and engaged. I can attest to this rapid response, as nearly all of our Slack colleagues worked in a global office before a sudden transition to working from home. Here to discuss the strategy behind this transition is Slack's VP of Technology, Stephen Franchetti.
Thanks, Harold. Great to be here, and thanks for having me. And as Harold mentioned, I lead the business technology team here at Slack. And business technology is essentially our version of IT internally inside the company. And I think it's safe to say, and perhaps an overused phrase, that we're living in unprecedented times right now with the global health situation we find ourselves in. And really, we're now in the largest remote work experiment that the world has ever seen. And this has all forced us to rethink how we do business and actually the way in which we support employees and the way we fundamentally think about the nature of work in the future. One thing that we do know is that the role of IT in general is more important now than it's ever been in navigating the current climate and really being the standard bearer in driving what the future of work actually looks like. And so what I wanted to do in this section is really building on the insights that Wayne shared up front and talk a little bit about Slack's journey through the pandemic and also our move to remote work and ultimately how we think we'll emerge stronger from all of this as we move forward. So at Slack, pretty much like everyone else out there, we've also found ourselves suddenly a remote team too. And this was actually a tweet as part of a tweet storm from our CEO, Stuart Butterfield, back at the beginning of March. And it really talks a little bit about Slack's journey through all of this. And when I think about that journey, it all happened really quickly, which is what I think took most people off guard. One minute we were talking about deep cleaning our offices, and literally within 48 hours over a weekend, we were closing down 18 offices globally across 10 countries and trying to figure out how to support over 2,000 employees now working from home. And when I think about the stages of response that we went through at Slack, there were really three key areas that we focused in on. Firstly, how do you transition as quickly and smoothly as you can to this new way of working? And then secondly, how do you actually replace that sense of connection now that people are all working from home? How do we engage and align our employees? And lastly, once we've done all of that, how do we then innovate and take the best out of working remotely and really put ourselves in a position to emerge better out of all of this? So firstly then, around transitioning to this new remote working environment. And I think the first consideration, at least for us, is how do we actually reduce friction for employees in making the transition? So as much as possible, how do we make their experience consistent regardless of where they are, whether they're in the corporate office, they're at home, or they're on a mobile device for that matter? And our philosophy really focuses on having a cafe or a zero trust model. So you don't have to have a VPN login in place to get to the corporate network to access the tools or resources you need. We're actually seeing a real move away from traditional firewalled off networks, which create a lot of friction for remote workers. And of course, probably no big surprise, we use Slack as our key system of engagement, really to simplify the experience and leverage the investment that we've made in software already inside the company. So how do we use the over 2,500 now integrations that we have in Slack to existing software, whether it's integrating with Salesforce or Workday or ServiceNow or Jira for that matter? How do we use those integrations to simplify our workflows and improve productivity for our employees? And clearly, with this new remote working environment, we've also seen a lot of change in the way we support our employees. And all of a sudden, things like virtual events have become a massive focus, much like we're doing today. And we're engaging in things like troubleshooting employee home networks, which we didn't really have to worry about in the past. And I think a good example of this shift, and one of the critical areas we needed to address, was employee onboarding. And in the past, we've had cohorts of employees joining Slack and spending their first week getting to know Slack in a physical classroom environment. And of course, with all of us being remote, that old model becomes impossible. So we really had to go through completely reinventing from the ground up how we run onboarding, including how we provision and ship laptops to employees. And then once they're here, we actually now have an onboarding bot inside of Slack that's almost like their virtual guide for the first 30 days. It greets them on day one and tells them what to expect in the first few weeks, and then makes learning content and important departmental information available to them and starts to connect them to their team members. So the whole idea here is that how do you use Slack to replace that sense of connectedness for new employees as they come on board? And then on top of that, on the topic of engagement, I don't think there's a company in this virtual room that we have here today that hasn't contemplated how to keep their employees feeling engaged and connected, especially as we've moved to remote work earlier this year. But as you can see from this particular slide, an overwhelming number of employees report feeling disconnected and unplugged at work. And not surprisingly, because of this, organizations are feeling the pressure to adapt to this new way of working. And I think about our own experience at Slack. We moved from 3% of our workforce who were working remotely before the pandemic to 100% remote workforce today. And as leaders, of course, we're looking for ways to bring alignment and coordination to our teams to ensure people are focused on the right priorities. But how do we also replace that sense of connectedness and engagement that teams more naturally feel when they're in the office? And at the same time, perhaps not surprisingly, we saw a real increase in Slack engagement and Slack usage from our customers overall as organizations started to move to remote work. And looking at both messages sent and average time connected to Slack, we're up by around 20%. And actually also new users joining Slack were also up by the same amount, around 20%. And this is literally in the space of a couple of weeks, which is unprecedented growth. So clearly more teams are relying on Slack than ever before to keep connected as they move to remote work. And as we watch this happening in our customer base, we're also going through our own internal journey to make sure our employees felt a sense of engagement. And at Slack, again, no big surprise, we use Slack for pretty much everything we do inside the company. And what we've seen, especially at this time, is that channel-based communication inside of Slack has become more important than ever in helping us organize information and conversations in a way that brings people together and drives transparency and really enables us to flex quickly to what's important, especially at this time that's incredibly important. And of course, channels can be created pretty much around anything, around projects, departments, social interest channels. And what we found stepping into the pandemic is that we had channels in Slack around topics that people were struggling with. So we had parents working from home channels. We had remote best practices channels around tips and tricks for maintaining balance. And we also had COVID support channels. And the interesting thing about this was that as we set these channels up, they literally went viral with people in similar situations, whether they're parents or caregivers, engaging with one another to help provide help and support. And of course, channels are also important in terms of aligning people to priorities because they pull together all of the people working on something into a common view. So you can stay in sync because you work together in one place. And so we have channels around major priorities inside of Slack. And if someone needs the latest perspective on where we are with those priorities, they can drop into the channel and get the latest and greatest on those company priorities. And we also have channels for teams within Slack, as you can see on this particular slide with the example of my Team BizTech channel, really allowing us to communicate priorities as they shift and also engage our employees in dialogue around those priorities. And so what we found was we were able to much more quickly replace that sense of connectedness and alignment because of the way we were already working and driving our work inside of Slack. So once we transitioned fast into our new way of working and then figured out how to engage and align our teams, we now actually find ourselves in a phase of looking at how can we emerge better as a result of all of this. So in other words, how can we innovate and take the best of what we've learned from this remote work experience to help define the future of work. And I will say that this massive shift to remote work has not only been a disruption to the way businesses operate, but it's also been a huge accelerant, with more traditional industries now really embracing working remotely and all that implies in terms of changing their operations and the way they collaborate. And as a business technology team here at Slack, we're looking at this period really as an opportunity for us to accelerate our thinking. In other words, how do we sharpen our focus on what's important so we can constantly up-level the value that we're bringing to the company? And part of this has really been rethinking our operating model so we can make sure we're focusing on the right things. And a central component of that model overall is our Slack on Slack program. And the idea around Slack on Slack and that program was fostering innovation on our platform. So in other words, how do we use the power of Slack to help us as a company move faster to achieve our business goals and create a much more productive experience for our employees? So when we hire a salesperson, we want them to spend time actually out there selling. When we hire a developer, we want them to spend time actually cutting code and creating great products and enabling their workflows to be as productive as possible so they can just get more done. And so to do this, we've built intelligent automation, bots, apps, and workflows via the Slack platform, drinking our own champagne, as they say. And key to all of this was engaging our employees in the process of this innovation. In other words, how do we crowdsource the tremendous creativity that we have in our employee population? And what we did here is actually send out a campaign via Slack to ask our employees to submit their ideas and how we could use Slack at Slack to create a much more pleasant and productive experience for them. And what this has done is not only help us innovate through this period, but it's also driven important business outcomes for the company. So for example, for IT support, we introduced an intelligent chatbot called AskBot inside of Slack that's powered by AI and natural language processing, automating those repeatable questions that we get from our employees and automatically doing things like provision software for them. And at this point, we're seeing an over 40% resolution rate on an automated basis, which is fantastic. So people no longer have that physical help desk to go to in the office. And so they're using AskBot in Slack. And it actually also frees up our support engineers to work on the higher order, higher value work for the company. For sales then, we also automated much of the lead to cash flow, getting us to a faster lead response time, reduced deal approval cycles, and again, as an end result, we've seen 20% faster deal cycles, which again is a great result. And my personal favorite, we have a legal bot called Ruth Bader Ginsburg bot that helps us with our legal processes. And the benefit of all of this is clearly the emphasis it puts on getting us to quantifiable results, really enabling IT to articulate how we directly impact the business. But it's also saved our employees literally thousands of hours of manual work every month, and also kept our employees engaged in the process. So the last example I'll share is on the topic of innovating during this crisis. And it's really about how we collaborate externally outside the four walls of our company to other organizations that we partner with. And we actually set up a Slack Connect shared channel across multiple companies, which included about 20 CIOs from various tech companies here in the Valley, really just to compare notes around how they were handling the COVID situation. And the beauty of Slack Connect is that it gives you the same experience as if you were collaborating with those individuals as though they were inside your company, with the same functionality and the same security applied. And the cool thing about this is, as the pandemic situation was unfolding, in real time, we had CIOs collaborating on key issues like laptop logistics around the world. As various regions in the world were really shutting down, how do we actually get equipment to new employees in those regions? How we're handling home office setup for employees. And now as things have started to move on, discussing how they're thinking about their plan for returning to the office, and really even what that looks like and what the future of work might look like, including the office as well. And so using this way of communicating through Slack Connect really gave us the ability to have a much more fluid, real-time way of collaborating across companies, tapping into the collective intelligence of this group of CIOs to help manage through the pandemic. In closing this out, what we've learned a lot, I would say, from this remote work situation we find ourselves in, and we're still learning as we move forward. But before I pass you back to Harold, I'd leave you with this thought, and I'm stealing on this slide one of Wayne's quotes here. But the essence of this is that I think there's going to be some goodness that will come out of this. It's an incredibly challenging situation we've been forced into, and this new way of working in a really short time frame. But when we come out the other side, the goodness will be around how we improve the way we work in the future. And that's what will happen at the end of this. We'll take some of the techniques and tools that we've learned from working remotely and apply them to improving the way we work going forward, even when we go back to our corporate offices in whatever form that takes. Really driving a new way of working in the future and allowing us to emerge better as a result of all of this. So with that, it's been a pleasure talking to you today, and I'll hand you back to Harold.
Thank you, Stephen, for that perspective on how Slack managed the experience for both employees and customers during our change to remote work. And speaking of the customer experience, Pan American Life Insurance Group's CIO, Miguel Edwards, is here to talk about his company's response to the pandemic. Hi, Miguel. It is a pleasure to have you.
Hey, Harold. Thanks for having me.
Can you tell us a little bit about your role at Paylick?
Yeah, absolutely. So Paylick is a 100-year-old plus insurance company. We specialize in life and health insurance, and we're also one of the smallest but most complicated global organizations you would ever meet. Just at about $1 billion in premium, We have operations in 21 countries, so you can imagine just the complexity of operating in such a global fashion, much as Slack does, but with such a small company. We've only got about 2,200 employees or so, and I lead the technology organization that serves both the infrastructure as well as all of the business applications that we use to sell life and health insurance.
Perfect. And that's a great segue into culture. I always love to talk about culture. It's such a hot topic right now, probably more than ever before. So what shifts were needed in this area and how were they implemented?
Yeah, Harold. So from a cultural perspective, it was actually quite phenomenal to watch the whole thing unfold. Insurance is part of the financial services sector. And as you can imagine, insurance is one of the older industries in the world, and as such has lots of very legacy constructs, down to the way we dress. I mean, prior to the pandemic, we were business attire, suit and tie every day. We were a workforce that was about being present and being in the office, and that's how we got to our collaboration. And so this whole disconnected state and this entire shift to remote work was not only just a technological challenge for us, but it was a cultural challenge. We had to just all at once get comfortable with not being in the same room with people that we were used to collaborating with face to face. It was kind of interesting to watch how people over time would get more and more casual. Folks would show up kind of business casual, and then the next thing you know, we were in t-shirts. And so just the cultural shift was very interesting. The other thing too that was fascinating is when you think about a company that is kind of that culturally set in a very traditional fashion, decision making was also very interesting as well. You know, we were used to getting into a room and there was a very hierarchical way of making decisions. And when you're disconnected and when you're trying to operate more in a remote environment, you don't have the benefit of all of the committees and having to bring people together and debate ideas. We had to come up with constructs and be able to delegate decision-making authority so that we could move as quickly as we used to move in person. We had to be able to quickly move that way remotely. So lots of concepts there from a cultural perspective. The other thing too that was very interesting as well is, you know, in the financial services sector, there tends to be a culture where there's an awful lot of discipline as to where work starts and when work finishes. And actually, I should fix that. It's actually when work starts and then when work starts again. It kind of never really finishes. That's kind of what we're trained to do here. And as part of that, you expect to have an isolation of your work area. And that's to say that there aren't distractions and there's kind of, you know, at this point, I'm working and leave me alone type of deal. And we had to really get into a space where we were comfortable with the kids coming into the room and interrupting us and you know, a cat walking across the desk. And those were things that were just really foreign to us. We were used to, you know, focus on work and that's it. And so it was a very, very interesting transition to watch how we became much more casual about the way we had to operate. And by the way, there was no hit to productivity. It was actually, we saw more productivity out of our folks with that cultural shift. So just some fascinating thoughts from a cultural perspective, Harold.
Perfect. Love it. From ties to teas. I love it.
Yeah, ties to teas, yeah.
Can you walk us through what that actual transition to remote work looked like?
You know, in Stephen's section, I saw one of the first slides there was a tweet from Stuart, and it almost could have been a tweet from my CEO. It was literally a light switch where one day, as you guys were talking, it was about sanitizing, and then all of a sudden we made the point, the split decision that at this point we're going to close down all of our offices, and it was quite a decision that we had to make. And as such, from a technology perspective, we had to completely rethink how it is that we provision technology to our workforce. What's fascinating about the insurance industry is that we've got a lot of people. It's a very human intensive business when you think about all the people that are necessary to do underwriting and all the people that are necessary to adjudicate claims. And these are folks that are used to coming into an office and working oftentimes on a desktop PC, by the way, not a portable laptop, and used to also to moving paper around. In fact, you know, a lot of the countries that we work in, they aren't as advanced as we are in the U.S., where things like digital signatures are acceptable, and you know, paperless environments and paperless workflows. There's still a lot of paper in some of these, by regulation, by the way, in a lot of these markets. So we had to very, very quickly devise ways in which we could get that workforce transitioned from being used to working in an operations center to them being able to operate at home. And that presented a lot of fascinating challenges. Think about 2,200 employees, most of whom come into an office every day. And you think about how we built out our VPN to accommodate a workforce that maxed out 400 to 500 remote employees at a time. You figure your traveling sales folks, et cetera. And now all of a sudden our VPN is stretched to the max. And we've got, 2,000 some odd folks on VPN. Imagine a support structure where we support Pan American equipment. And now we've got people calling into our help desk asking for help on their Linksys and their Belkin routers and whether or not their cable service is up or down, and just how we provide that kind of support was fascinating. Imagine a scenario where we had to get our call centers up and running. So we're shipping out headsets and getting people on soft phones. We had to mobilize all of that extremely, extremely quickly. I will tell you that the most important thing throughout all of that, and Slack played a critical role in this, by the way, is communication. We realized upfront as this was unfolding that communication was going to be the key. That we had to focus on over communicating and worrying about that problem if that would be a champagne problem if we created that, right? The over communication problem. But we were communicating through every possible channel that we could come up with, and we lived into a mantra that says, in the absence of communication, people will create their own. So we didn't want to leave any information vacuums for people to start, trying to come up with their own ideas of what things were going to happen, how things were going to develop. We wanted to be right there in real time communicating information and being transparent about the fact that we don't have all the answers right now. We don't know how this is going to unfold. So it was quite an interesting event of which I will say communication was key.
That's great. And I totally agree. The key is definitely strong leadership and regular communication. As advice for your fellow leaders, what were a few strategies from the onset that seemed promising, but eventually required a pivot?
One of the things that I think I thought about as we went through this is that trying to maintain status quo, trying to assume that we were going to be able to just make some modifications around the edges and live into this new world, I think that would have been a silly supposition. I happen to have lived through 9/11 in Lower Manhattan. And one of the things that I can tell you going through that whole transition is that things will never be the same. I'm sure all of us that were around during 9/11 remember what it was like to travel, air travel before that. And, just throw that out the window. From that point forward, air travel, everything about the way we handled business continuity and disaster recovery, everything we handled around risk, et cetera, was completely transformed in an instant. And it's important that we thought about that going into this new response to a global pandemic. Things will never be the same. And I think realizing that up front is super important. Being willing to test every sacred cow, every construct, and think about what those things might look like and what they might mean in terms of even disregarding them or discarding them in this new world. So that was one of the key things that we had to think about coming into this new world that we're talking about. The other thing too is that it's important we realize that going through these scenarios, you're not alone going through these scenarios, and to leverage your networks and your partner networks. Leveraging networks, our partner networks, folks like Slack and people who have perhaps have better experience in communicating in this remote setting. One of the things that we did actually that was pretty fascinating was we took one of our vendor partners up on an idea early on in having a virtual happy hour. We'd never done that before. Our happy hours were all live, and we went pretty hard when we did go for those happy hours. But this is one where it's let's get the group together. We got about 25 people together at a clip. We had a Zoom call, and basically we went around the horn and said, what's your favorite cocktail and what's your bucket list vacation? And, just things like that we got from a vendor. We didn't conceive of that. We got that from one of our vendor partners as an idea. Just opens us up to being able to leverage best practices and thoughts from across our network. And folks like Slack and others have been really helpful in us thinking about that. Another thing that we had to very quickly think about was work-life balance. I got a Slack message from one of my colleagues that interestingly enough said, this is not work from home. This is live at work. And that hit me really hard because I tend to try to lead with love, and I care quite a bit about my team. But what I heard in that was that it was crying out at the fact that we had lost this whole notion of work-life balance because your office is now at home. There is this need to really, to really come through for the company. And so we really had to, more so than just talk about it, we had to put things in place that actually sought work-life balance. I'm not suggesting, by the way, that we've solved it. We still have people that are working flat out. Most of us are, but we're getting better and finding some structures that we were putting in place. For example, we came up with something that we've recently implemented called No Meeting Wednesdays. So the last Wednesday of every month, you are not to have any meetings. You're not to schedule any meetings, and you use that time to catch up on a lot of your administrative work or your kind of heads down work. And if you plan accordingly, you'll have that space available to you. We also set some pretty strict boundaries around when we would have meetings. So we agreed that we would never have a meeting after 5 p.m. local time. So that requires that we're now cognizant about other people's time zones. We came up with a concept that said every Monday and every Friday, no meetings after 3 p.m. local time. So that gives you, again, an opportunity to bookend your days without meetings and actually trying to get work done. So that was important. Another thing, too, that comes to mind, Harold, I think about the title of this session when you think about human, inclusive, and flexible. One of the things that I'm really big on is diversity and inclusion. And when you move to a remote environment, the inclusion part becomes very, very difficult. When you're face to face and you can read body language and you can check in with people just by walking by their cube, inclusion, and by the way, inclusion mean inviting someone to the dance and allowing them to participate in the conversation. It gets really, really hard to do that in a remote setting. So having and creating constructs where you are intentionally bringing together your team, specifically those who are more introverted, the folks that have really awesome thoughts but don't always come out with them, creating those forums to make sure that you are actively trying to pull from those individuals is super key. And then the last thing that I would share with you, and it kind of ties back to the communication element, is making sure that we're always putting our employees first as part of this pivot. And my CEO did a phenomenal job setting the example. He was right at the helm with constant communication, making sure that we were always thinking about employees and their insecurities, because obviously if your employees are concerned and they're insecure about their future, they can't deliver for the company. So making sure that that our CEO and I, by extension, were able to communicate the security of the company, indicate that we care about our employees. We weren't going to rush back into the office and compromise their safety, being concerned about their safety of their family, being concerned about what work-life balance means when you now have to deal with schooling your kids at home. And just in general, our willingness to be flexible in this new world brought a lot of comfort to folks that they were going to be able to do both. So those are some things that were super important for us as we made this pivot.
Wow, it's very refreshing to hear that the focus was on the welfare of your employees and their needs. It's super great to hear, especially from a leader as yourself. To conclude, what tools were helpful in this process of transition to remote work?
Well, it's so funny. Our journey with Slack was incredibly serendipitous. I joined the company back on January 6th of this year, of 2020. And so I joined a brand new company. My charter was to lead Pan American into this modernization effort where we could go out and really do some new, cool, and innovative things in our markets, as well as ensure that we had a platform for growth. And 3 months into the deal, I got thrown a global pandemic as well. Part of early on, though, what I realized that we needed a way to collaborate, and I've got about 200 or so folks on my team who are spread across the world, across Latin America and the U.S., et cetera. And part of what we realized we had to do was create a collaboration platform for them to operate more effectively. And we thought that Slack would be a good option for that. And so I first signed up for the free version, and then did the kind of the cheaper basic subscription as I got more and more folks involved. And interestingly enough, I was only planning on rolling out Slack for IT, which was kind of just my thought process. But then when the pandemic hit, all of a sudden it became, as I said, a very serendipitous opportunity where we've got this messaging platform that's super easy to onboard people. And before you know it, I was getting lots of demand from other areas of the business that says, hey, I hear you guys are doing this thing on Slack. Can we get on that? And sure enough, before you know it, we turned around, and then I had to have a conversation with my Slack account team saying, I think it might be time to go enterprise grid. And glad we did, because that brought us a lot of opportunity to then further integrate across our ecosystem. So beyond Slack, there's tools like Atlassian that we're taking a lot of use, making a lot of use of, Confluence in particular. And we've got integrations between Slack and our Atlassian product suite, which is making collaboration a lot better. We were also, too, in the middle of a modernization and rollout of ServiceNow. And so as you start thinking about how we've been using Slack, and we've got goals to use Slack as our single pane of glass for all of these tools across cyber, across ServiceNow and our ITIL functions, and across our software development platforms. We plan on using Slack as that singular pane of glass. And it's going to be super critical that as we move forward, that we start thinking about how we use these collaboration tools in the most efficient way possible. I do believe that this pendulum can swing the other way, and we can get to a point where we've got tool overload. And that's something that we're watching out for. And for us, from a collaboration perspective, thinking about how Slack it becomes that funnel and that rally point will allow us to hopefully make better use of all of our tooling across our organization.
We truly appreciate you, Miguel. It's been an honor to speak with you and chat with you, and thank you for allowing us to be a part of your journey. And we wish you all the best at Pan American Life Insurance Group, and appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Thank you so much, Harold.
And thanks again to Wayne Kurtzman and Stephen Franchetti for sharing your perspectives as well. And to our audience, we hope you benefited from these insights and best practices, as we intended to help your organizations be successful and emerge stronger in this new remote work environment. Thank you for attending this session, and enjoy the rest of Frontiers.